He messaged me on a Tuesday evening. He said he'd driven that road 100 times since it happened, always slowing down when he reached the 40-kilometer marker, just in case. This story came from a night shift taxi driver who works the mountain roads between Jiufen and Ruifang in northern Taiwan. He asked me not to use his real name. I've called him Ah-Ming. Everything else, the coin she left on the seat, the address she gave him, and what he found when he looked up his grandmother's name in the family record, is exactly as he described it to me. The mountain road between Jiufen and Ruifang has no streetlights for most of its length. That was the first thing Ah-Ming had learned when he started the night shift 11 years ago. Not the curves, not the gradient, not the way the fog came in fast from the sea and cut visibility to almost nothing without warning. Those things you learned by driving. The darkness you learned on the first night, when your headlights hit the tree line, and you understood that out here the dark was real, not the washed-out half-dark of the city, but the complete kind, the kind that pressed against the windows and had weight to it. He knew the road now, the way he knew his own apartment. The long switchback above the old mining terraces, the guardrail that had been bent and straightened and bent again over the years by cars that had misjudged the curve in rain, the small shrine at the 40-kilometer marker, always lit. 3 red lanterns on a wire above a stone shelf, holding offerings that were replenished by someone he had never seen. He knew which stretches went quiet on the radio and which ones his phone lost signal entirely. He knew, almost to the minute, how long it took to get from the upper village to the valley floor in clear weather, in rain, and in the kind of October fog that made the whole road feel like it was somewhere slightly removed from the rest of the world. It was that kind of fog when he saw her. She was standing at the roadside, above the old mining town, at a spot where the road widened slightly before the next descent. No bus stop there, no reason for a person to be standing at the side of a mountain road at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. She was simply there, the way objects are simply there, not arriving, not waiting in any animated sense, just present in the beam of his headlights as he came around the curve. He slowed without deciding to. 11 years of night shifts had given him a reflexive caution about figures on this road in the dark. It could be a person, could be a drunk, could be someone whose car had broken down on the descent. He rolled down his window. She was dressed simply, dark trousers, a plain top, a light jacket the color of old tea. Her hair was pulled back. She was not young, somewhere between 50 and 70. The kind of age that is hard to fix precisely in bad light. She did not look distressed. She looked, if anything, like a person who had been expecting a car and was mildly satisfied that one had finally arrived. "Where are you going?" he asked. She gave him an address, a house number, and a lane name he recognized as being in the valley below, in a residential pocket of Ruifang he had driven through many times. He nodded, unlocked the rear door. She got in. He pulled back onto the road and started the descent. She did not speak again. He did not try to start a conversation. 11 years of night fares had taught him to read passengers by how they sat, and she sat the way people sit when they are finished with the day and want nothing more from it. Straight but not tense, hands in her lap. Looking at the window, he watched the road. The fog thinned as they came down out of the upper elevation, and the lights of the valley appeared below, the usual scattered orange grid of a small town at night. The radio was playing something low. He adjusted the heat slightly. He checked the rearview mirror once. She was still there, still looking at the window. And then he focused on the road and did not check again. He found the lane without difficulty. A quiet residential street, older houses, a few small trees. He slowed to read the numbers on the walls. Faded paint, some of them. The kind that had been there long enough to become part of the surface rather than sitting on top of it. He found the number she had given him. He pulled up to the gate and put the car in park and turned to say they had arrived. The back seat was empty. He sat very still for a moment. The kind of still that is not calm, but is the thing before a decision. The body pausing to take stock before it chooses what to do next. He looked at the rear seat directly, fully. The way you look when you want to be absolutely certain of what you are seeing. Empty. The door on the right side was closed. He had not heard it open. He had not heard anything from the back seat in the entire time he had been driving through the valley. Had not heard her shift or breathe or move. He had simply assumed she was still there because she had been there when he checked, and he had not checked since. He got out of the car. He walked around to the rear passenger side and opened the door and looked in. Nothing. He looked up and down the street. Empty. The gate in front of the address was shut. No light on inside the house, or what he could see of it through the trees. He stood on the pavement for a moment with one hand on the car roof, thinking about what to do with what had just happened. Then he got back in. The coin was on the rear seat. He had not noticed it immediately. It was small and dark in the low light, sitting near the edge of the seat, as though it had slipped from a pocket. He picked it up. It was old. Not dirty, not corroded, just old in the way that things get when they have been handled a long time. Smooth on both faces, the characters on it worn but still legible if you tilted it toward the light. He did not recognize the mint year. He turned it over twice in his fingers and then held it in his palm and looked at it for a long time in the glow of the car's interior light. He drove home. He did not tell his wife. The next afternoon, before his shift started, he came back out to the car and looked at the coin again. He held it for a moment, then he set it on the dashboard, just inside the windscreen where he could see it, and left it there. He did not know yet why he did that. He would, later, but that night, he simply drove his shift and said nothing and kept his eyes on the mountain road. And every time his headlights hit a curve, he watched the space ahead with a little more attention than he had before. 3 nights went by without incident. Ah-Ming drove his usual shifts. He picked up the late workers coming down from the Jiufen tea houses, the occasional tourist who had stayed too long and missed the last bus, the delivery drivers finishing their rounds. Normal fares, normal nights. The mountain road was the mountain road. Fog on Tuesday, clear on Wednesday, a light rain on Thursday that made the descent slick above the second hairpin and required his full attention for a solid 10 minutes. He did not think about the woman, or rather, he thought about her in the way you think about something you have decided not to examine. Quickly, sideways, and then away. The coin stayed on the dashboard. His wife had asked about it once, picking it up and turning it over in the kitchen light before he came home, and found her holding it. He said he'd found it on the road. She set it back down without pressing further. She was a practical woman who had been married to a night shift driver for 15 years and had learned which questions were worth asking and which ones weren't. On the fourth night, a Tuesday again, he saw her. Same stretch of road, same spot above the old mining town where the road widened before the descent. She was standing at the roadside in the same light jacket, the same dark trousers, the same stillness, present in his headlights, the way a stone is present, simply and without movement. His hands tightened on the wheel. His foot moved toward the brake and then did not press it. He kept his speed. He drove past her without stopping, eyes forward, jaw set, and in the moment that he passed, he felt the air in the car change the way it changes when a window is opened briefly. A small pressure shift, something moving, and then it was normal again, and the road ahead was empty, and the fog was doing what fog does. He drove to the next straight section and stopped there, hazard lights on, and sat with the engine running and both hands on the wheel. Then he looked at the back seat in the rearview mirror. On the seat, near the same edge where the first coin had been, there was a second one, same size, same dark, worn surface. He had not stopped. The doors had not opened. No one had been in the car since his last fare. A young man he had dropped at the Ruifang train station 40 minutes ago. The seat had been empty then. He had glanced at it at the station, out of habit now, the way he had started glancing at it at every stop since the first Tuesday. He turned off the hazard lights and drove the rest of his shift without picking up another fare. When he got to the dispatch lot, he sat in the parked car for a long time before going inside. The dispatch lot at that hour held 4 or 5 drivers finishing their paperwork, a thermos of tea on the table near the door that everyone used and no one refilled, and the low sound of a radio in the back office playing a station nobody had chosen. Ah-Ming poured himself a cup of tea and sat down at the end of the long table and thought about how to begin. The older drivers were the ones to ask, not the younger men. They would laugh or pull out their phones to look something up, which was not what this required. He needed someone who had driven this road for a long time and had the kind of knowledge that does not come from looking things up. Old Tsai was at the far end of the table, filling out his log sheet in the slow, careful way he did everything. He was 68, had driven the mountain route since before Ah-Ming was born, and had the broad, unhurried face of a man who had spent most of his life watching roads rather than people. Ah-Ming moved his teacup down the table and sat across from him. He kept it brief. A woman on the road above Jiufen, 2 Tuesdays running, the address in Ruifang, the coins on the seat. He said it the way you say things you are not sure you believe, plainly, without decoration, watching the other person's face for the response that tells you whether you sound foolish or whether you have said something that lands with weight. Old Tsai stopped writing. He did not look up immediately. He set his pen down on the log sheet and looked at it lying there for a moment. And something moved across his face that was not quite fear and not quite recognition, but was in the neighborhood of both. Then he looked up at Ah-Ming. "What address?" he said. Not a question, the tone of a man confirming something he already suspects. Ah-Ming told him the lane and the number. Old Tsai was quiet for long enough that the radio in the back office cycled through 2 songs. One of the other drivers refilled the thermos. A phone rang somewhere and was answered. Old Tsai looked at the table. "Burn the coins," he said finally. "Both of them. At a temple, not at home. Take them to the shrine at the 40-kilometer marker if you want to do it properly." He paused. "And don't look at her face. If you see her again, Don't look directly at her face. Why? Ah-Ming asked. Old Sai picked up his pen. He looked at his log sheet as though he intended to continue writing, but his hand stayed still on the page. Because if you look at her face, he said quietly, you'll recognize her. And once you recognize her, you can't pretend you didn't. He closed the log sheet. He capped his pen. He said he needed to get home, which Ah-Ming had never heard him say before in 11 years of shared shifts. He left his tea unfinished on the table and walked out through the lot without looking back. And his car started and pulled away and was gone before Ah-Ming had finished processing what had just been said to him. Ah-Ming sat at the empty table for a while. The radio played. The other drivers came and went. Someone turned off the overhead light at the far end of the room, and the space shrank to the small yellow circle of the lamp above the table and the pale glow of the back office through the partition glass. He took the 2 coins out of his jacket pocket. He had picked the second one up before leaving the car. He didn't know why, only that leaving it there had felt wrong in the same unexamined way that leaving the first one on the dashboard had felt right. He set them side by side on the table and looked at them. Same size, same wear. The characters on the face of each one were the same, and the mint here, he could see now with the lamp directly above, was the same on both. He did not burn them that night. He drove home. He looked up the address on his phone while his wife slept, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with the screen light on his face. It took him a while to find what he was looking for, which was the history of the building at that address, which led him to a municipal record, which led him to a newspaper archive search, which returned one result. He read the headline. He read it again. He put the phone face down on the table and sat very still in the dark kitchen for a long time. And the 2 coins were in his jacket pocket. And outside the window, the city was doing what it always did at this hour, which was to keep going without him, indifferent and lit, while he sat with something that had just changed the shape of everything he thought he understood about his own family. He went to the library the following afternoon before his shift. He had spent the morning at the kitchen table with his phone, trying to find more from the single result the archive search had returned the night before. The headline had been enough to tell him there had been a fire at that address in 1974. The date had been enough to tell him it was a Tuesday in October. But the article itself was behind a digitization paywall, the kind that regional newspaper archives used when they had scanned their back issues but not fully indexed them. And the phone screen was too small for what he needed to read carefully. He needed to see the whole thing. He needed to see the names. The Ruifang District Library was a small building near the old train station, the kind of place that had been there long enough to feel like it had always been there and always would be. An older woman at the front desk pointed him to the archive room at the back without asking what he was looking for. The room held 3 long tables, 2 microfiche readers that looked like they had not been used in years, and a row of binders along one wall labeled by year and publication. He found 1974. He found October. He carried the binder to the nearest table and sat down under the fluorescent light and opened it. The pages inside were photocopied, slightly yellow, the text small and dense in the way newspaper text was before layouts changed. He went through them slowly, day by day, until he found the issue, dated the morning after the fire. The article was not long, 4 paragraphs, a single photograph, of the street taken from a distance. The kind of photograph where you could make out the shape of what had happened, but not the detail. He read it once quickly and then again slowly, the way you read something when your eyes have caught a word before your brain has caught up with what the word means. Ruifang District News, October 1974. A residential fire broke out in the early morning hours at a lane address in the Ruifang Valley district, resulting in the deaths of 2 occupants. The deceased are identified as a woman, aged 31, and her son, aged 7. Investigators report the fire originated in the rear of the ground floor. A neighbor who assisted at the scene stated that the boy was found outside the building. Cause of death for the woman is consistent with smoke inhalation. A memorial notice will be published in the following edition. He turned the page. The memorial notice was there. 2 days later, small and simply worded in the formal style of the period. He read the woman's name. It was not a name he recognized, not a family name he had heard his father mention, not a name that appeared anywhere in the small collection of things he knew about his father's childhood, which was a collection so thin it barely deserved the word. His father had not spoken about where he came from, not in any detail. Ruifang, yes. That much Ah-Ming had known. The broad geography, the province of origin, but no streets, no neighbors, no specific buildings or schools or temple festivals. His father's childhood had existed in Ah-Ming's mind as a kind of undifferentiated past, a period before the period he knew, with no landmarks and no stories attached to it. He looked at the son's name. He had to read it twice. Not because it was unclear. The type was perfectly legible, small but sharp. 2 characters he had seen written thousands of times in his life. His father's name, the exact name, the name on the photograph on the shelf in his living room, the name on the death certificate he had filed 6 years ago, the name his mother still wrote in full when she sent money to the temple for the annual remembrance offering. He sat very still at the table in the archive room and looked at the 2 characters in a 50-year-old memorial notice and understood, with the particular quality of understanding that arrives not as a thought but as a physical sensation, a dropping feeling, a shift in the chest, that his father had been the 7-year-old boy found outside the building, that his father had grown up in that house in Ruifang, that his father had been alive on that Tuesday night in October 1974, while his mother was not, and that his father had spent the rest of his life, 61 more years of it, never once saying so. Ah-Ming put his hand flat on the page, not pressing down, just resting it there, the way you rest your hand on something when you need a moment before the next thing. His father had grown up in the valley house at that address. His grandmother had died in a fire there in 1974, and for the past 2 Tuesdays in October, his grandmother had been standing at the roadside above Jiufen, standing at the spot where the mountain road begins its final descent toward the valley, toward the house, toward the address she had given him. And asking a driver she did not yet know, was her grandson to take her home. The fluorescent light above him hummed. Somewhere in the main room of the library, a chair scraped. A door opened and closed, the ordinary sounds of a building going about its afternoon. He sat in the middle of all of it and held the knowledge that had just settled into him and thought about his father. His father had been a quiet man, not cold, warm, even, in the way of men who show care through small, consistent actions rather than words. He had always checked that Ah-Ming's car tires were properly inflated, He had always known which foods Ah-Ming's wife could not eat and had remembered every time without being reminded. He had remembered birthdays and kept them simply: a phone call, a meal, nothing elaborate. He had been the kind of father whose presence was reliable and whose absence, when it came, had left a gap that was larger than Ah-Ming had expected, because it had been filled in ways he had not noticed while it was happening. But he had never spoken about his mother, not once. Ah-Ming had known there was a grandmother on his father's side who had died before he was born. Had known this the way children know things that have never been explained to them, through absence, through the specific silence that surrounds a subject that is present but not discussed. He had never pushed. His father had never offered. It had simply been one of those areas of a parent's life that a child learns, without being told, to leave alone. He thought now about something his father had said in the hospital 6 years ago. In the last hours, Ah-Ming had been holding his hand. His father had been drifting in and out, and at one point he had spoken, clearly, without slurring, with the particular focus that sometimes comes near the end. And he had said an address, the lane name and the house number in Ruifang. Ah-Ming had thought it was confusion, the mind returning to something random and old, the way minds do. He had squeezed his father's hand and said it was all right, and his father had closed his eyes, and those had been the last words. Not confusion, not random. His father had been saying the address the way a person says the thing they have been carrying the longest, the thing they could not say in life, but needed at the last moment to say to someone before they went. Ah-Ming closed the binder. He sat for a moment longer, his hands on the cover, and then he stood up and carried it back to the shelf and walked out through the library into the afternoon light. His shift started in 2 hours. The mountain road was waiting, the way it always waited, patient, curved, the fog already beginning to gather above the upper elevations as the temperature dropped toward evening. He sat in his car in the library car park and did not start the engine for a long time. He thought about what old Tsai had said, about burning the coins, about not looking at her face, because once you recognized her, you could not pretend you had not. He took the 2 coins out of his pocket and held them in his palm and looked at them in the afternoon light. And he understood now that he was not going to burn them, and he understood why his hands had known that before his mind did, had known it from the first night, when he set the coin on the dashboard instead of throwing it from the window or leaving it on the seat where he had found it. He had kept them because some part of him had already known they were not a warning. They were a fare. He had one living relative who might know. His father's older sister, his auntie Rong, was 81 and lived in a care home on the eastern side of Keelung, 20 minutes from Ah-Ming's apartment by car. He had visited her twice in the past year. The dutiful visits of a nephew who was not close to his aunt, but understood the obligation of proximity. She was sharp still, mostly. Her memory came and went in the particular way of the very old, reliable for things 40 years ago, and sometimes unreliable for things 40 days ago. She had not attended his father's funeral. She had said she was not well enough, which he had believed because it was probably partly true, and because the alternative explanation that she simply had not wanted to come was not something he had wanted to sit with. He called the care home in the morning and arranged a visit for that afternoon. He did not say what it was about. He drove to Keelung after lunch with the 2 coins in his jacket pocket. and the name from the memorial notice written on a folded piece of paper in the same pocket, which was unnecessary because he had not forgotten it and would not, but which he had written anyway because holding the paper felt like holding something solid in an investigation that had so far produced nothing you could put your hands on. The care home was a clean, quiet building that smelled of floor wax and the particular food smell of any institution that cooks for many people at once. Not unpleasant, simply institutional. The smell of a place where the individual details of what each person might have wanted have been averaged into something manageable. His aunt was in a room on the second floor with a window facing the harbor. The harbor was grey today, and the cargo ships on it were small in the distance, and the whole view had the flat quality of a day when the light had not quite decided what it wanted to do. She was sitting in the chair by the window when he came in. She looked smaller than he remembered, which was always the way with the very old. You carried a version of them from your last visit, and they had reduced slightly by the next one, as if the body was editing itself down towards something essential. She looked at him when he came in, and she knew him immediately, which was a relief. "Ah-Ming," she said, "sit down." He sat in the chair across from her, and they talked for a few minutes about ordinary things: his wife, his work, the weather, the food at the care home, which she said was acceptable, but relied too heavily on things that had been boiled when they should have been fried. He let her lead this part. He poured tea from the flask the staff had left on the side table and handed her a cup and waited until the ordinary things had run their course. Then he put the folded paper on the small table between them and smoothed it open without saying anything. She looked at it. Her face did not change in any dramatic way, but something in it settled, the way a face settles when it has been holding a particular expression for a long time as a kind of defense and has just decided, in one quiet moment, to stop. She looked out the window at the grey harbor. She did not pick up the paper. "How did you find this?" she said. Not a question about the method, a question about the fact of it. How had this arrived, after 50 years, in the hands of someone who had not been told? "She's been standing on the mountain road," Ah-Ming said, "above Jiufen, Tuesday nights in October." His aunt was quiet for a long time. One of the cargo ships on the harbor moved very slowly across the window frame, left to right, and disappeared behind the edge. She watched it go. "Your father never told you," she said. "No." She nodded, not surprised. The nod of a woman confirming something she had long suspected, but had not known for certain until now. Then she began. She spoke to the window the entire time, not out of avoidance. Ah-Ming understood this after the first few minutes, but because the window was the right direction. Looking at him would have made it a conversation, and this was not a conversation. It was a recitation, something that had been stored in a particular place for 50 years and needed to come out in the order it had been stored, without interruption, without the back and forth that changes the shape of what you are saying. The fire started just before 3 in the morning. Her brother, Ah-Ming's father, 7 years old, sleeping in the front room because the back room was too warm in October and he had dragged his blanket out there 2 weeks earlier, woke to the smell of smoke. The lamp in the back room had tipped. How it tipped was something no one established with certainty. The investigators said it was consistent with being knocked over, and the most available explanation was that the boy had been in the back room at some point in the night and had bumped it in the dark. He did not remember doing this. He had said so. She believed him, or had told herself she did, which was close enough to the same thing after 50 years. He had gone to the doorway of the back room and seen the fire and seen his mother asleep on the mat, and he had called to her. She had not woken. He had called again. The smoke was already heavy. He was 7 years old, and the fire was between him and his mother, and the door behind him was open, and the night air was coming through it, and it was the only direction that was not fire and not smoke, and not the sound of something burning. He ran. The neighbor 2 doors down found him on the street 20 minutes later, sitting on the curb in his blanket, not crying, just sitting, the way children sit when something has happened that is too large for the available responses. His aunt stopped there for a moment. She held her teacup with both hands, though it had been empty for a while. The light outside the window had shifted slightly, going flatter, the grey deepening toward the grey that comes before rain. He was 7 years old, she said again. Not defending, just stating. The way you state a fact that has needed stating for 50 years, without ever quite being stated. He never spoke about it, Ah-Ming said. He could not. She set the empty cup down on the table. Not because he was ashamed, or not only because of that. He could not speak about it because every time he tried, and he did try, once, when he was about your age, he tried to tell me the whole thing. He could not get past the moment at the door. He could describe the smell of the smoke. He could describe the fire between him and our mother. He could describe the open door. And then he stopped. Every time. He stopped at the door. She paused. I think the story ended for him there, at the open door. Everything that came after, running, surviving, the whole rest of his life, felt to him like something that happened to someone else, like he had run through that door and left himself behind. Ah-Ming looked at the folded paper on the table between them, his grandmother's name in old newspaper print. He thought about his father checking his tire pressure every time he visited. His father remembering his wife's food allergies without ever writing them down. His father on the phone every birthday, brief and warm and reliably there. A man who had spent 60 years making sure that nothing he was responsible for came to harm, not as a gesture, not as performance, as the only way he knew how to live with what had happened at a doorway when he was 7 years old. Did she know? Ah-Ming asked. At the end, when he said the address in the hospital, did he know she was still? I think so, his aunt said simply. He drove the Ruifang route for 2 years when he was young, before he moved to the city. He stopped suddenly. He never said why. She looked at her hands. He knew the road. Ah-Ming drove back from Keelung in the early evening, through the tunnel and along the coast road, with the sea on his left, going dark under the cloud cover, and the harbor lights beginning to come on along the waterfront. He drove without the radio, which he almost never did. The silence in the car had a different quality from the usual silence of a night shift. It was not waiting silence, not the silence of a road about to produce something. It was the silence of a man sitting with a story that had just been completed, all its pieces finally in their right places, and finding that completion was not the same as comfort. He understood his father now in a way he had not understood him while his father was alive. He understood the tire pressure and the food allergies and the birthday calls. He understood why there had been no grandmother in his childhood, no stories about Ruifang, no visits to a house that no longer existed. He understood what the address in the hospital had been. Not confusion, not the random misfiring of a dying brain, but a man finally saying the thing he had been unable to say his whole life into the nearest available air, because he was running out of time to say it. He had said it to Ah-Ming, who drove the mountain road, who drove it every Tuesday night in October, who had, without knowing why, been handed 2 old coins by a woman on the roadside above Jiufen and had put them on his dashboard instead of throwing them away. He pulled into the lot outside his building and sat with the engine off. He took the 2 coins out of his pocket and held them in his palm, one on top of the other, and looked at them in the dim light from the lot lamps. Next Tuesday was 4 days away. He put the coins back in his pocket. He went upstairs. He ate dinner with his wife, and he told her, quietly and completely, everything: the woman on the road, the coins, the library, the care home, what his aunt had said. His wife listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about her he had always trusted most. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Take flowers, just something small, and drive slowly." He nodded. He washed the dishes. He went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about a 7-year-old boy standing at an open door with the fire between him and his mother, and about a woman who had been waiting with extraordinary patience at the top of a mountain road for 50 years for someone from her family to come back and take her home. He was going to stop this time. He bought the flowers on Monday evening from the small shop near the dispatch lot that stayed open late for the night shift workers who needed to pick up things on their way home. Nothing elaborate. A bundle of white chrysanthemums, the kind used for offerings and remembrance, wrapped in plain paper. He brought them home and put them in a glass of water on the kitchen counter, and his wife looked at them and did not say anything, which was the right response. He did not sleep much that night, not from fear. He had moved past that somewhere in the 4 days since Keelung, past the reaching for explanations and the checking of details and the turning things over in the kitchen dark. What remained was simpler and harder to name. The feeling of standing at the edge of something that needed to be done and knowing you were going to do it and simply waiting for the time to arrive. Tuesday came the way Tuesdays come, unremarkably in sequence, the morning light through the bedroom curtains, the same as any other morning. He drove his wife to her office, came home, ate lunch, checked the car, the tires, the fuel, the coins, still in his jacket pocket, which he moved to the breast pocket closer. The chrysanthemums he wrapped back in their paper and laid on the passenger seat. He left at 9 in the evening, told his wife he would be back by midnight. She nodded and touched his arm once, briefly, at the door. He drove north toward the coast and then up into the hills toward Jiufen, taking the mountain road from the lower entrance. The long way, the way that let him approach the upper stretches from below rather than coming down from the top. He wanted to arrive at the spot from the right direction. It seemed important, though he could not have said exactly why. Something about approaching rather than passing through. The mountain road at 10:30 on a Tuesday night was what it always was. Dark, curved, the tree line close on both sides. The red lanterns of the shrine at the 40-kilometer marker, visible from a distance as 3 small, warm points against the black. He drove slowly. He had told himself he would drive at half his usual speed, and he did, the car moving through the switchbacks at the pace of a vehicle with nowhere urgent to be. which was the truth. The fog was light tonight, not the thick sea fog that sometimes turned the upper road into a tunnel of white. Just a thin haze that blurred the edges of the tree line and made the lanterns at the shrine glow with a slight corona. He passed the shrine and touched the brake lightly, as he always did at that curve. A habit of 11 years, and the road opened up ahead into the wider stretch above the old mining town. He saw her before his headlights reached her. That was the only way he could describe it afterward. He knew she was there before he saw her. The way you know a person has entered a room before you look up. A change in the quality of the dark ahead. A sense of presence where there had been empty space. And then his headlights found her, and she was there, exactly as she had been the 2 times before. Standing at the roadside where the road widened, still and unhurried, in the same light jacket, the same dark trousers, her hands at her sides. He pulled up beside her and stopped. He put the car in park. He did not look at her face directly. He kept his eyes forward and slightly down, at the dashboard, at the 2 coins he had placed there before leaving home. Then he reached across and opened the rear passenger door from the inside, the way drivers do when they want a passenger to know they are welcome. He heard her get in. The door closed. The weight of the car shifted very slightly. The small adjustment a vehicle makes when a person settles into a seat. He had driven long enough to feel that shift without thinking about it, and he felt it now, real and specific, and exactly the weight of a person sitting down. He put the car in drive. He pulled back onto the road. He drove the mountain road the same way he had driven it for 11 years, except slowly. The switchbacks, one by one, the headlights sweeping the tree line on each curve, the guardrail that had been bent and straightened and bent again, the long straight section above the second terrace, where on clear nights you could see the harbor, lights of Keelung in the far distance. He drove without the radio and without speaking, and she did not speak either. And the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a car at night, moving through dark roads, carrying someone who has been waiting a long time to be carried somewhere. He thought about what to say. He had prepared something, not a speech, just a few words, an acknowledgement that he knew who she was, that he was sorry it had taken this long, that his father had been a child and could not have done differently, and had spent his life with the weight of it regardless. He had arranged these thoughts carefully over 4 days. Now, on the road, they seemed both necessary and inadequate in equal measure, which was probably the correct feeling to have about them. He drove down through the lower switchbacks, where the road became smoother and the valley lights spread out below. He turned onto the main road into the town, and then navigated the familiar streets toward the lane in the old residential quarter. The streets were quiet at this hour. A convenience store with its white lights spilling onto the pavement. A dog behind a gate that did not bark as he passed. The turn onto the lane, which he now knew by more than just its name. He found the address without slowing to check. He knew it now the way he knew the road, in his body, without having to think. He pulled up and stopped the engine. Where the house had been, there was a flat, empty lot. He had looked it up after the library. The building had been demolished sometime in the late 1980s. The land cleared but never redeveloped, left to weeds and the patient reclamation of things that grow through concrete when nobody stops them. In the dark, the lot was just a flat absence between two buildings, defined by what it was not rather than what it was. A kept space, an empty address. He sat for a long time. He did not check the rear-view mirror. He had made a decision about that. He would not watch her leave. Whatever happened in the back seat was hers, not his to observe. He simply sat with the engine off and his hands in his lap, and the chrysanthemums on the passenger seat, and let the time pass in the particular way that time passes when you are present to something without needing it to be other than it is. After a while, he could not have said how long, 10 minutes or 20. The car clock blurred at the edge of his attention. He became aware that the quality of the air in the car had changed, not dramatically, simply lighter. The way a room feels after a window has been opened and closed again. The pressure having moved through and equalized and settled. Something that had been present was no longer present, not gone in a frightening way. Gone in the way that things go when they have reached the place they were going. He looked in the rear-view mirror then. The back seat was empty. The door was closed. The coins were gone from the dashboard. Both of them, the two he had placed there before leaving home, which he had not heard fall and had not heard move. In their place, or near where they had been, there was a small dark mark on the dashboard surface. The kind of mark left by something that has sat in one place long enough to leave a trace. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the empty lot through the windscreen. The car smelled of smoke, faint and soft and not frightening. Not the acrid chemical smell of something burning now, but the deep settled smell of old wood, of a house that had once stood and been lived in and had held a family inside it before it was gone. The smell of a home that had existed, that had been real, that someone had slept in and cooked in and raised a child in and had loved, in all the ordinary unspoken ways that people love the places that contain their lives. He sat with that smell for a while. Then he picked up the chrysanthemums from the passenger seat, got out of the car, and walked to the edge of the empty lot. He set the flowers down at the boundary where the pavement met the old foundation line, still faintly visible under the weeds if you knew to look for it. He stood there for a moment with his head bowed, not praying exactly. He was not a praying man, but present, acknowledging, doing the small human thing of standing in a place and letting it matter. He walked back to the car. He sat for another moment. Then he started the engine and drove home through the quiet streets of Ruifang and up onto the coast road and through the tunnel and back to the city. And the mountain was behind him in the dark, and the road ahead was lit and ordinary and his. And he drove it at a normal speed, and the radio played something low that he did not listen to, but was glad was there. His wife was awake when he got home. She looked at his face when he came through the door, and she said nothing, only moved over on the sofa to make room. He sat down beside her. She put her hand over his, and they sat that way in the quiet of the apartment, not talking, while the city outside did what cities do at midnight, which was to keep going without needing anything from either of them. He thought about his father one more time before he slept, not with grief, or not only grief, with something closer to understanding, which is what grief becomes sometimes, when it has been given enough time and enough information, and one clear October night on a mountain road to finally find its proper shape. His father had run through an open door at 7 years old and had carried that door with him for the rest of his life. Ah-Ming had opened a different door, a car door, an ordinary one, on a mountain road in the dark, and something that had been waiting 50 years on the other side of it had finally been able to come through. That was enough. It was, he thought, exactly enough. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.